Thanks everybody for being here. There's nothing I like more, very few things at least, than talking about voting and talking about voting with students and in this case with social workers. So I'll get started and then hope that we do have some conversation when we get done. So the Voting is Social Work campaign is something that brings together social workers in professional organizations, in academia, really all of the major components of our profession to catalyze commitment to civic engagement, really as a part of the practice and purpose of social work. So to start some about really where Voting is Social Work began, put yourself back in 2016. That's when Voting is Social Work began. And many social workers then and now, again, all throughout our profession, were concerned, to say the least, about our democracy, that it was threatened, and further that efforts to undermine democratic legitimacy and really advance it are a threat to our values. So that's why we have the Voting is Social Work campaign. But what is it? This is a long list. It's a long list, honestly. The highlighted items here are things that we particularly emphasized within the School of Social Welfare here at KU, and I'll talk more about that as we go along. We began our work with Voting is Social Work where we really try to begin everything, honestly, which is centered on our values as a profession. The values students have to agree to uphold when they get admitted to our school, what we get assessed on in our licensure, what our curriculum tries to advance, and these values make it clear that voting is, in fact, social work. Voting is Social Work is furthermore articulated as working on all levels of the profession, so that those who are doing clinical practice, those who are doing advocacy, those of us in the academia are all seeking to weave voting and civic engagement into our work. Beginning with the 2016 election, professional associations and leaders and academic institutions really forged a collective effort to elevate our profession's attention to voting as not just a generic civic responsibility or a partisan thing, but really as a key piece of who we are as social workers. There are still a lot of elements of the Voting is Social Work campaign that are kind of experiments in 2016, then in 2020 and 2022. And as we look to the future in 2024, the campaign is still refining its approaches, but a lot started with what has been most valuable to us, which are materials and supports to help us make voting a part of how we work with students and prepare them for the profession. At KU, of course, we aren't just social workers and a school of social welfare. We're also a part of the University of Kansas. And so our students also encounter the active civic engagement efforts of the broader university. And that's a lot of what we hope to continue to increase in 2024. We used a lot of the Voting is Social Work campaign's materials and messages, yes, but we also tried to bring in some of what Kate and others in the university do so that students are seeing similar kind of mission consistent materials about voting everywhere. The goal here is really to live what we know is necessary to catalyze a lifelong commitment to voter engagement, not just voting for candidates, but seeing civic participation as a core feature of one's life. And getting to there requires constructing identities that frame voting as expected and pro-social activities. So how do we try to do that? I'm going to talk a bit about some of the specific things that we did this last cycle in Voting is Social Work and a bit of a look towards the future. Across many of our courses, students were invited and encouraged to register to vote in messaging that was provided and in dedicated time within the course. We are among those who hope that voter registration becomes a part of enroll and pay, but in the meantime, these are some of the things that we did. You know, other courses went further than voter registration. There was a generalist policy course where students learned about the history of voting rights and some of what the landscape looks like today, and other classes did their own approaches in these efforts. It is, of course, the case, though, that we can't expect all instructors are super eager to weave voter engagement into their courses, nor to figure out how to make our new innovative curriculum work with this emphasis on voter engagement. So a lot of what we did was rely on this Voter is Social Work toolkit that we provided to a lot of our instructors. What that meant then was things like, getting beyond the classroom, because in social welfare, what students learn doesn't just happen in class, but a lot in the field. So we provided continuing education units for field instructors, and really help to equip students as ambassadors in their organizations for social work as for voting as social work. And these are some of the messages that we had through Voting as Social Work and some other organizations that we tried to include in digital and in signage throughout our building in Twente, in ways that we could hopefully surround students, again, with this idea that voting isn't just something you should do, it's what we do as social workers. We also helped our field agencies understand what their legal rights are in doing voting, and also tried to elevate the stories of social work students doing voter engagement. So we've done some things, and we want to do more things. The fall 2022 midterms, we feel like, are just the beginning. So we're looking at things like, how can our integrated health scholars bring voter engagement to the healthcare organizations where they are placed? How can we equip students with tools to do relational voter-to-voter engagement and integrated voter activities using their own social networks? We'd like to see Election Day be a holiday on our campus, and we want to help students know how our professional association decides who they support as candidates, so that students can educate themselves as they get ready to vote. Our involvement with the Voting as Social Work campaign unites us with other schools across the country, forges a strong professional identity that elevates civic engagement and democratic protection as a core social work commitment, and builds our students' skills. What we are trying to do, and the reason this matters to us, is to help our students help others vote and advocate for voter protection as something that we do because we are social workers.
So first question for Melinda, how do you make sure that international students and Americans without documentation, et cetera, are fully included and engaged in this campaign and feel safe in engaging in this type of work? And I guess that's actually something that all of our panelists could speak to. How are you thinking about undocumented folks and international students in the work that you're trying to do with civic engagement? But Melinda, we can start with you, and then if other folks have thoughts.
No, it's a fantastic question, and thank you. I mean, I would say there's both an answer and then also more of a kind of grappling, and something that I think we are still struggling with. So I do think that nationally, and in terms of what we did at KU, a lot of the kind of voting is social work is about redefining civic engagement to include not just the act of casting a ballot. I mean, in part that was helped by the fact that when and how people even do the act of casting a ballot has changed so much. It's not about like going to the polls on election day. A lot of that language has changed, but also about the kinds of questions that we ask and how people are or educating ourselves and engaging in conversation. It's so that voting is not a transaction, but a transformation in terms of how people engage with their communities and think about pushing change. So for example, one of the classes that did work around the Voting as Social Work campaign had a particular module unit on how some communities around the country are including undocumented immigrants and other non-citizens in voting in things like school board elections and local municipal races. There are places that have made progress in that direction of you are voting as a resident in this, or a person in this community, not a official citizen. And so talking about what are the advantages and disadvantages and the processes that are used to expand out our thinking about voting. I would say then there's been some discussion about this nationally, but I don't think we've done enough about it here in KU to really include those for whom the United States isn't even not only a place where they have been, but a place they necessarily intend to stay for their practice and their work. Those who are not immigrants or people who are not official citizens, but those who may not really identify that much with US politics, because the United States is a place where they are getting an education, but not the place where they see their future unfolding. And I don't know, I don't feel like I have a great answer for that. So I think it's certainly a reminder that voting in even an expanded form and a kind of larger vision is still something that is largely nationally constrained or bound. And so yeah, I think we do have work to do to think about how can we educate ourselves enough as social workers or anybody else about what political processes look like in other countries, so that we can talk about civic engagement in a way that is not entirely US centric.